While The Division was no great departure from Tom Clancy's usual material, it was a step in a fresh direction for Ubisoft. It's no secret that their open world games follow a comfortably familiar checklist formula, throwing you into a conflicted game world filled with things to do and saturated with minutiae. The Division was, in almost every way, a bridge between what Ubisoft were and what they were aspiring to be. It's a game that attempted to create a compelling solo adventure set in Tom Clancy's grimly likeable universe, which looks akin to Ghost Recon with the mechanics of an RPG. And it mostly worked too. Mostly. But jump forward 3 years and The Division 2 is hitting the market in a much better condition and in a much better position. It's not perfect, but it's about as close to it at launch as I've seen from a game in this genre. As with its predecessor, the biggest challenge for Ubisoft is to tell a compelling story while at the same time letting your actions as the player define your experience. It's a balance they still don't get right in the sequel, but one which at the same time kind of does its job. As with the last game, the overarching story of a virus-ravaged US at the mercy of a bunch of newborn terrorist groups succeeds in giving just enough framework to hang the concept on, but little else. Ubisoft have taken pains to reinforce that this is not a political game, though many will take it as such. Using the White House as a base of operations is hardly subtle, but then neither was blowing it up in Independence Day. Either way, it's less likely a political or even symbolic choice, it's more likely just because it was cool. That said, it's hard to separate a game like this from the politics of the nation in which it's set, but this is a gunsmoke fantasy about good Americans saving America from bad Americans, and as such, taking it seriously is wildly missing the point. You are an agent of the Strategic Homeland Division, an elite sleeper operative trained in secret and embedded into society, to be activated only when the shit hits the fan so hard it breaks the rotor. And that just happens to be 7 months ago, when contaminated dollar bills spread a deadly strain of influenza called green poison, or the dollar flu. It's never quite made clear how much of the US is affected, but New York is ground zero, and the virus has at least reached the capital as the Division 2 takes place in Washington, D.C. Your nameless, voiceless protagonist arrives in the capital as all-out war is erupting between what remains of the Joint Task Force, the beleaguered, thinly stretched SHD, and the violent collectives using the collapse as a means to get rich and establish their own brands of rule. As a plot, it's a bit over the top, once again pushing the idea that if America was in such a state, the rest of the world would be so useless as to be no help at all. The UN doesn't seem to exist in this world, and it's all a bit silly when you examine it too closely. It's also far too loose of a plot, giving very little reason for what is expected of you and leaving sparse room for proper characterisation. What's here is well presented and well acted, but I realised after about hour 15 that I had no real idea why I was doing what I was doing. It's a testament to the gameplay that I also didn't really care. Those of you watching from the sidelines could be forgiven for thinking that Division 2 is a shooter. It looks like one after all, with its cover mechanics and roadie running. But it's actually a thoroughbred RPG. You're not firing bullets, you're firing numbers, and they're crunching the other numbers that your enemies are wearing instead of armour. See that can of fuel you can shoot? Made of numbers. That grenade? Numbers. That group of allies who just rocked up to help you out? Numbers, numbers, numbers. Enemies are less spongy than before, and you can now shoot the armour off tougher opponents to expose weak spots and exploit their gear. Your defense and damage is governed by the stats of your gear. Backpack, mask, gloves, body armor and knee pads can all be swapped, modded and upgraded to improve your survivability, while cosmetic vanity items alter your clothing. You can either alter hair, beards, camo and tattoos when you've unlocked the appropriate vendor. To compensate for the improved time to kill, enemies are tougher and much more aggressive. The only way to win fights is to use the environment, stay in cover, and always be improving your build. There are a number of perks to make you hardier, including increased inventory space, extra XP from headshots, and increased grenade and armor kit capacity. You also have 8 core abilities that employ high-end tech to tip the balance in battle in your favour. You can unlock them in any order, but it will take around 15 hours on a chilled playthrough to unlock them all. They include a turret that can be adapted to shoot flame or snipe with high caliber rounds, a hive of nanobots that can repair ally armor or harangue the enemy, a pulse beacon to highlight enemies and items of interest, and a ballistic shield. Each skill is incredibly useful, and the agent who combines the right skill variants at the right time will live much longer, because enemies will work together, flank you, charge you, fall back, spring traps, and employ gadgets of their own. To succeed, you'll need every skill at your disposal. Although the AI is occasionally inconsistent, as enemies become indecisive, get stuck on the scenery, or suddenly decide to stand in the open and get killed. Sometimes they'll sense your presence with an almost supernatural talent too, but on the whole it works very well. The map is huge and at first seems like the standard Ubisoft tick list. The difference here is how organic it all feels and how everything you do feeds into the story, lore and narrative. The missions might ultimately follow a formula of shooting things until the boss appears, and then shooting them too, but the various objectives within the missions, as well as the variety of both indoor and outdoor locations, means that each one feels different enough to the last, where you don't become numbed by them. Only 2 or 3 of them stand out as truly memorable, but I never felt bored or tired in the Division's 35-hour campaign. I say 35 hours, but that's not just story missions, that's also taking into account a wealth of side content. Smaller, more bite-sized missions open up as you progress, and there are also control points to capture and bounties to hunt. You might stumble upon a public execution you'll feel compelled to stop, a contaminated area to ransack, or malicious shooting ranges where you can show off your skills. Then there are the convoys to either disrupt or protect, and propaganda broadcasts to silence. And on top of all this, you could just wander the streets raiding buildings for supplies to turn into your settlements, thus completing projects in return for blueprints. Crafting is robust and easy to get to grips with, as materials are everywhere and blueprints are in abundance. You'll recruit someone towards the latter half of the campaign who will also allow you to recalibrate guns and gear, essentially carrying your favourite skills over to the other items or even re-rolling stats altogether. And when I say the Division 2 is feature complete, I mean it. I've barely touched on the endgame content, and after 35 hours I'm still unlocking things to do and finding collectibles and secrets. Hidden bosses called Hunters carry over from a concept introduced in Division 1, and killing them unlocks cosmetic masks to wear proudly as a sign of your victory, while 2 dungeon-like strongholds offer a steep challenge with great rewards. A third is promised soon, along with a glut of free and paid content to keep the already impressive endgame ticking over. You'll choose a specialisation at level 30 from a choice of 3, Survivalist, Sharpshooter and Demolitionist, and you'll gain access to the higher world tiers with new missions, objectives and enemies. And then you got the Dark Zone, a more balanced, nuanced version of what came before that changes the entire atmosphere of the game as soon as you enter it and realise that now other players can hunt you too. But what about that loot game? Well, that's incredibly strong too. What's more, it feels meaningful, and you'll often spend several minutes mulling over numbers. Should you go for that high damage over increased accuracy, fast reload speed over stability? Should you focus on armour, health, or the various talents attributed to the high tier equipment that can affect everything from skill power to vendor prices or armour regeneration rates and cooldowns? Consider that most gear can also be modded to further tweak your given build and then save to loadouts, and you're beginning to get a picture of just how impressive the loot game really is. Performance-wise, I'm happy though not blown away. It runs smoothly enough though never climbs much higher than 30 FPS on Xbox One X, although it never really drops more than a couple of frames either. I've experienced 3 crashes in 35 hours, but on all occasions I logged back in and was returned to the same group and mission inside of around 2 minutes. A couple of bugs have forced a suicide though. In one case I got stuck inside a building with no doors, and in another I couldn't follow my team into a new area and had to die to respawn on their position. Beyond that, I've seen a couple of visual glitches and hiccups, but nothing game-breaking. The environments are highly detailed and dripping with atmosphere. Wildlife is everywhere, from stags and deer to raccoons raiding trash cans, foxes chasing crows and scurrying rats. And the dogs are in such abundance you wonder why no one is training them as assets. I've counted at least 5 different breeds as well, which is impressive in and of itself considering how few enemy composites there are. Heaps of refuse, burned out cars, shattered buildings and bullet-shredded flags paint a picture of a capital in ruins, while the weather effects are just great, from driving rain that you can barely see through to nighttime ash storms that swirl around patches of fire in the war-torn heart of the city. Texture popping might be an issue now and again, that's true, but Ubisoft and Massive know how to create an atmosphere and run with it. I could go on, and I have already, I know, but the Division 2 is just a superb experience, alone or with others. It's an accomplished shooter, a deep RPG and a hugely satisfying looter all at once. It has a smattering of minor issues here and there, but besides maybe one serious contender, and I'll let you decide which one, the Division 2 is without a doubt the best in class.